Again, welcome to Freedom. It's good to see you here today. I hope that you have already felt and experienced the presence of Christ in this place, His Spirit at work, and felt the love of His people here. Freedom Church International isn't a perfect church. In fact, it's a church full of broken people, but who don't wallow in our brokenness, who celebrate the fact that a gracious God is changing us, taking us just like we are, but not leaving us just like we are, and that's a great place to be. Those of you who are joining us online, thanks for tuning in. We love that you take part in worship that way, and we appreciate you doing that. And we are in a series right now that is entitled Built to Last, and I'm going to be sharing a message with you this morning entitled Built on God's Purposes. And I really want to begin on a more personal note. I want to share some relevant things from my own story, and as I was reflecting on it this week, I think that a lot of what I'm going to share with you today, I don't think I've ever shared in a group setting before, but I want to share some of my experience and how it relates to the teaching today. If you've been around me for long, you know I grew up in a Christian family and have been in church all of my life. I'm one of those, my testimony literally is, I started going to church 9 months before I was born and have never stopped. That's, I just grew up in that kind of family, always in church, and very grateful for that. Parents of deep faith and always have had a deep faith and set the right kind of example. And the things I'm going to share this morning, I can't blame on my parents because I have an older brother and a younger brother, and most of what I'm going to share on the negative side isn't true of them. So, like, if they didn't do it to them, I can't blame them for doing anything to me. So, my story is, my junk is my junk. I don't get to put it on anybody else. But when I've just reflected a lot on my life this week, and on the plus side, I love that I grew up in a stable family that taught me about the love of God and a love for His church and for His Word, and those are all good things. And I came to know the Lord at a very early age and have been in the church all of my life. But it's interesting to me to look back and reflect on all of my growing up years, and particularly my early adult years, and to recognize the level of misery that I lived with. And most of what I'm going to share with you, not only have I never shared in a public venue, a lot of it I've hardly ever talked to anybody about, and during those years wouldn't express to anyone. And probably some of you can relate to that, like your deepest struggles and your deepest pain, that you felt like it wasn't safe to talk about that, and it actually is a really unhealthy thing to hold all that inside. So I will just tell you that having grown up in the church and having spent all those years in the church, that my life was really very much a two-sided coin. That on the one hand, if you had just been watching me from the outside, you would have said, good kid who doesn't get in trouble, is always in church, reads his Bible every day, in church every Sunday, doing all the right stuff. In terms of the measurables, I checked the boxes. In fact, I loved on Sunday morning getting to check the boxes on my offering envelope. Did that. Maybe God will love me because I can check all the boxes. So on the outside, you would say, this is a kid, this is a teen, this is a young adult who has got it together and is doing the right stuff. And I want to confess to you honestly that during a lot of that time, my life was filled with turmoil and misery. And I want to just share a little bit of where that came from for me and how God has changed that in my life. Because, and I, to this day, I can't explain why I am wired the way that I'm wired. Like I said, I don't get to blame anybody else for that. But I look back, and some of my earliest memories of like grade school, two things that stand out to me. And they both, I think, are driven by the same issue, that there was an overwhelming drive and need for perfection. Now, the way that manifests itself on the one hand was having to be the best in school, having to be the smartest in the class, having to be the fastest kid on the football team or whatever, just feeling I needed to be the best. And the biggest way that it manifests itself in terms of what you could see was in school, just so driven in school. But a very parallel thing on the spiritual side of the coin, this drive for perfection that drove me crazy because I knew that I never measured up. And so I just battled for years with feeling like I must not be saved, I can't really be a Christian, because even though I could check all the boxes in terms of exterior stuff, I recognized all these areas that I fell short and things that were wrong in my heart, and felt like, well, a real Christian couldn't feel the things that I felt and think the things that I thought. And so I was tormented by that. And the outward expression of how I would deal with that is I would pray 1,000 times over for Jesus to really come into my heart and really save me so that I could get rid of everything that's wrong. I walked the aisle more times than I could count when I was growing up. I mean, there had to be times when Brother Ray Foreman, the pastor of the church that I grew up in, must have wanted to just slap himself on the forehead and go, here he comes again. You know, what's he going to say this time? You know, did I really mean it this time? I'm just rededicating my life to the Lord. I made more decisions to rededicate myself to the Lord, thinking this time I'm really going to give Jesus my all, and always coming back and feeling so worthless because I knew that I never measured up to God's perfect standard. And then just in like normal life, the biggest way that would manifest itself for me was like in the classroom, feeling like I needed to achieve, I needed to overachieve, and always feeling like I needed to do more. So, and my parents never drove that for me. Like, I don't ever remember my parents even like saying, did you do your homework? I mean, I'm not saying they didn't care, but I'm sure with me, they were like, this kid's already neurotic. We need not ask him those kinds of questions because literally 4th and 5th grade, I'm just freaked out all the time about, what if I'm not ready for this test? What if there's a pop quiz that I'm not ready for? And I was a straight A student. It wasn't that I was underperforming, but it didn't matter how well I did. It was never good enough. And I can remember 4th and 5th grade just being so stressed out, I would get sick over feeling like I wasn't going to be ready and I wasn't going to do good enough. I mean, literally just major stomach disorders, skin disorders. And the doctors would just be like, this kid's just that stressed out. What 4th and 5th grader gets that stressed out about anything living in a healthy family? Me. And I want to tell you, as I got older, it didn't get better, it got worse. And by the time I got to high school, I'm not talking to anybody about any of these struggles. Spiritual struggles, struggles of feeling like I need to be perfect and don't ever measure up anywhere and needing affirmation and just eating up with all this stuff on the inside. By the time I got to high school, I found a system that helped to feed that need in my life. Because when I got to high school, and I was good in school, and so that became a way to try and create some sense of satisfaction, like this is the thing I can be good at, this is the thing I can feel better about. And in high school, they actually created a deal where at the end of every year, they would have an awards banquet, and they would give for every single class, they would pick out the one student who had the highest average in that class, and they would give them a certificate and a little medal that basically said, good job. You were the best in that class. So that feeds that thing in me. So I'm like, I've got to win that for every class that I ever take. And this will tell you just how driven I was in that. So I always took the hardest classes, physics or whatever the hardest math, the hardest sciences were. I'm taking those things. And somewhere in there, I threw in typing class. Oh, that was a mistake. That was a mistake. Because you see, if it's an academic class, I can go home, master the material, and come back to the class and make 100. And whew, at least for the moment, I've got some relief. You can't do that in typing. I stressed all year long. I was getting A minuses. And I'm like, you have no idea. I mean, to tell you how neurotic I was, I am like losing my mind. I may get a B in typing. That year, another student in my grade got a certificate and a medal that one year for typing because I couldn't master that class. That's how eaten up with this I was. Y'all, it's worse than you imagine. My senior year, so I'm not talking to anybody about this. This is like my moment of confession, so I'll pay you later. Thank you for being my therapist today. But so I did learn early enough on, never compare grades, especially if you're a good student. Do not talk to other students about whatever you're stressed out about or about your test scores, because making good grades does not make you more popular. If you're the curve buster, they hate you. So I don't talk to anybody about what my grades are. All this is just stuff in my head. And so every year, no matter how well I've done, it wasn't good enough in my mind. And so I have to set higher standards for myself for the next year. So by my senior year of high school, the list of things are just ridiculous. It's not enough that I've got to be valedictorian and I've got to earn all the scholarships. But I remember one of my senior goals was I cannot make less than an A on any graded test the whole year. Forget the report card thing. There can't be a test that I make less than an A on. And I still remember one test in one subject, trigonometry, and I went through it so fast, I misread the instructions on one section of the test, and I made an 88 on one test. And I remember being so angry, and a friend of mine in the class looks over, and he can see I'm just like so tied up in knots. He's like, "What, did you flunk the test or something?" I'm like, "No, but what are you upset about?" I'm like, I didn't do good on the test. And they were going, "Well, what'd you make?" And I finally fessed up and showed him, and he's like, "What is wrong with you? You made an 88. That's what we all want to make. Why are you upset about that?" And I finally made the mistake for the first time of admitting out loud to one other person, my goal this year was to never have a test that I made less than an A on. And so, like, he just thinks that's hilarious and turns and tells the entire class, God is my witness. They thought it was so funny. The teacher stopped class. They went and got the yearbook photographer, came into the room, wrote up on the chalkboard, Mark Price makes a B, and made me pose with my 88 test grade and took a picture for the yearbook. That's how out in left field I was. Oh, and then I went to college. It's just a bigger pond for chasing after the same thing. And I'm telling you, no matter what kind of goals you set for yourself, if that's your mindset, you never feel like you measure up. You've always got to do more. You've always got to be better, and it never satisfies you. Now, I continue to live like that. I went through 4 years of college straight out of high school, and then 4.5 years of grad school going to divinity school straight out of college. So, like, I'm educated way beyond my intelligence. Just be clear on that. It's like I went to school way too many years. And I will never forget, it was May of 1994, the end of my 4th year of grad school. And I had just been chasing, climbing, trying to get to a place that I could feel good about myself. And the thing that had made life so much more complicated was, when I was younger, I could just make it all about school, and I actually could hit it out of the park in the classroom, but life got a lot more complicated. I got married, and we had kids, and I started having to work multiple jobs to support a family while going to school full time. I was doing ministry. And in the spring of 94, in the span of 6 weeks, we had a baby, we moved, I took my first full-time position in a church, and I had finals at the end of my 8th semester of grad school, and I just remember hitting a wall where I could not function anymore. Now, from the outside, my life was finally arriving at a point that you would go, well, you know, you're checking the boxes. You know, you've got a wife, you've got kids, you've got a house, you just landed your first full-time job in the thing you've been training for all these years. You're only a semester from graduation. Woohoo, life should be good. And I've never been in a worse point in my life than what I was at that point. I could no longer function. I mean, I literally remember winding up in the hospital so sick, eaten up with stomach ulcers. I just completely hit the wall, and the thing that I knew was, I can't continue like this. I didn't have any idea how to live differently. I just knew I couldn't survive like this. I literally could not even function, and I knew there's no future for me. And I'm like, I'm the poster child for that person that the outside of the cup looks nothing like the inside of the cup. It's not like privately I was doing all of these wicked things, but still on the inside, my life was just a train wreck. I was absolutely miserable, even though on the outside you'd say, he's doing great. And I'm just in desperation going, God, I don't even know how to go forward. I don't know how to live, because I've been making it up to here. I've been choosing what mattered and then trying to do that better than anybody else to make me feel better about myself. And this plan is terrible. I need your help. And I guess that's the first time in my life that I got desperate enough to give up on living life on my own terms, and really desperately crying out to God and having no earthly idea what he could give me or do to change me. And this is going to sound vague. I don't know how better to describe it. But what I do know is that in a moment of time, in a very brief season of my life, grace was poured out on me First of all, just to be able to let go of the way that I had been thinking and living and to quit believing that my life was defined by those things. And maybe for the first time to really and truly begin to accept the grace of God in my life, that maybe He could actually just love me like I am, knowing all that He knows about me, and that He could accept me without me having to perform or jump through more hoops to get Him to like me. I do know this, that began a process of about 5 or 6 years in my life of, okay, if I'm going to let go of the way that I have been living and let go of me deciding what mattered most in life, now I've got to figure out, what is it I'm supposed to wrap my life around? And another pivotal thing at that point in time was that my pastor, who had been my mentor as well, offered for the first time a class that some of you have taken, a Bible study called Experiencing God, Knowing and Doing the Will of God by Henry Blackaby. And if you've done Experiencing God, you know that a fundamental, just the core part of that study is, they talk about it in terms of, they've got this little diagram, but it's the 7 realities of experiencing God, of knowing and doing the will of God. And it all starts with and revolves around this key truth, that God is always at work. God is always at work in the world doing God-sized things. And that God actually then reaches out to us and invites us to join Him in His work. Now, that may not sound all that profound to you, but let me tell you the other half of that deal. And so the Experiencing God study walks you sort of through the process of discovering where God is at work and recognizing His voice and His call to invite Him and what He's doing and how we respond to that in faith and get involved in what God's doing. Well, a part of what you learn throughout that study is what we typically do in place of what I just described, which is we decide what we want to do. We decide what's important, and we dive headlong into that, believing we're doing a good thing, and then we sort of look back over our shoulder and go, and God, of course, we need you to bless that, so come on and join us, and please bless what we're doing. And I realized really quickly, I've lived my whole life like that. I've decided what's important. I've set the agenda, but I'm a Christian, so I always ask God to come along, tag along, and bless what I'm doing. And I want to tell you, that plan is rotten. It doesn't work well at all. Some of you know that in your own experience. The other part of how that gets expressed is that when we're trying to be really spiritual, that we tend to pray a prayer that we've probably all prayed at different times. Oh God, just show me your will for my life. Show me your great, grand purpose for my life so that I can go and do that. And Blackaby does a great job of driving home the point that that's asking the wrong question. Oh God, what is your will for my life? Oh God, what is your great purpose for my life? Because what's that all about? Me. As if I'm the center of everything. And that asking that question almost never yields a meaningful result. I mean, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but think about how many times in your life you've prayed a prayer like that and never gotten a satisfying response to it. I mean, hasn't that been your experience at times? Oh, God, just show me your will for my life. Did you get some great revelation that suddenly put your life in order? Probably not. What Blackaby teaches in that study is that the right question isn't, oh, God, what's your will for my life? What's your great purpose for my life? But it's to recognize the better question is, God, just what's your will? What is it that you're up to, that you're doing, that you would invite me to be a part of? And you may say, well, it's just 2 ways of saying the same thing. No, it's not. Because one of them's all about me and the other one's all about God. Instead of saying, oh, God, what's your great purpose for my life? Just saying instead, God, what are your great purposes? What are your never-changing, eternal great purposes? Because what I want to do is learn to wrap my life around your purposes. And I want to tell you, this is the great revelation of the day, if you want to just cut to the chase. For all of us who, and I've heard so many Christians express this over the years, I just haven't been able to find God's purpose for my life. Stop looking. Stop looking for that, because it will be a fruitless search. Look instead for God's great purposes, and then orient your life around those purposes, and you will find wonderful fulfillment. And over the span of the next 5 or 6 years, I began to search the scriptures. I began to read and really seek out, God, what are your great purposes? And God filled in those blanks. And in the years and decades since then, I have been tirelessly working to orient my life around the great purposes of God. And I want to tell you, it is such a better way to live. It is such a more fulfilling way of living. It's not a stressed out thing of feeling like you never measure up. There's joy in this, and there's not so much mystery and vagueness about it. And what I want to just, in the next few minutes, share with you is what the scriptures do show us are God's 5 great purposes for our lives. Now, the cool and ironic thing is, so I wrestle for years with this, and when I finally come into grips with this is about the time Rick Warren comes out with that fantastic book that he wrote, The Purpose-Driven Life. And I'm like, Rick, could you have not done that 10 years sooner? You would have saved me a lot of trouble. But it is a fabulous book. What I'm about to share with you sounds very much like what Rick put into that book. And if you've never read it, go out and get it and make it one of your reads for this year, because it is fantastic. But what I want to just share with you, I'm going to move quickly. I'm going to paint with a broad brush, but to try and give us a 10,000-foot perspective on what it looks like to lead a life that is oriented around the 5 great purposes of God for our lives individually and for the church. And the whole New Testament backs this up. These are the 5 core things the New Testament is calling us to. But if we had to boil it down, 2 passages pretty succinctly spell them out for us. And let me lead into that by asking you this. If, as a follower of Jesus, you could only have like 2 little passages of the Bible that were all you got to hold on to for the rest of your life, and this would be all the Bible that you had, what passages would you want? Or like if you met a new Christian in a foreign land and they didn't have access to the Bible, but you could just give them 2 little passages to try and sum up what it means to live as a Christian, what would you give to them? My contention would be that these might be the 2 best that we could pass along: the Great Commandments and the Great Commission. Consider these and see if they don't come at least close to the top of the list. The Great Commandments. Mark tells us in his gospel account that what Jesus said that I'm about to quote was in response to an expert in the law coming to Jesus and saying, okay, teacher, out of all the commandments in the scriptures, of which there were hundreds, which one really matters the most? That's a great question. Could you just boil it down? What is the really important deal in this? And Jesus said, the first and greatest commandment is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. This is the first and the greatest commandment. Okay, that's a home run. Wouldn't you agree? Jesus got that one right for sure. And he said, but there's a second that's like the first. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. And then he said, all of the law and prophets, that's just another way of saying all of the scriptures that they had up to that point, all of the law and prophets are summed up in these 2 commands: loving God with all of your heart, love your neighbor as yourself. Those are the great commandments. The second passage is the Great Commission, when Jesus had been risen from the dead and when he had had several weeks to be with his disciples, and he is giving his parting instructions in the final verses, that last half of the final paragraph of Matthew 28. Jesus said to the disciples, all authority in heaven and on earth is now mine. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations. There's our 3rd great purpose. Baptizing them into the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. There's our 4th. We'll come back to that. And teaching them to observe everything that I've commanded you, and I am with you always to the very end of the age. In those 2 statements, Jesus has summed up for us, if we search all of the New Testament, the 5 great purposes of God. They are not unique to your life. They are not unique to my life. Every single one of us are called to wrap our lives around these 5 things. I want to just briefly shine a light on each of these 5 things and invite you to consider, am I really engaging? Am I really getting my fingers deep into that? The first one we will summarize, beginning with the first and greatest commandment. We will sum up with the word worship, which we'll define today as loving, honoring, and enjoying God. Jesus said it starts with this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. The Westminster Shorter Catechism, which, is just a series of questions and answers designed to define and sum up our faith, starts with the single most important question. What is the chief end of man? In other words, what's life supposed to be all about? And the answer that we're taught to give in response is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. You ever just stop to think about that truth? You've heard that line before, that the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. That's a great summary of what worship is about. To give God the honor that He's due and to just enjoy the daylights out of what we share with Him. That's why God made us. Now, all 5 of these things that we're going to talk about are critically important. They're like legs of a table. They all need to be equally weighted. But if we were going to give any extra weight to any one of them, this is the one that we would give it to. We are made to love and enjoy God. But now that's a real problem for people like I was for so many years, when you think you don't measure up and that God probably doesn't really love you, and that when He thinks about you, the main thing that He feels is disappointed. Anybody besides me in the room ever feel that way about your life at some point in the past? It's an awful feeling, isn't it? It's very hard to ever feel like you draw near to God when all you feel is that you're a great disappointment to God. In Psalm 149, David said this, "The Lord takes pleasure in His people." You ever just consider that God enjoys you? John called us to worship today with that passage from the end of Genesis 1, the beginning of Genesis 2, where God is looking at what He made, and when He looked at humanity, He said, about everything else He said, that's good, but about humanity, He said, that is very good. And when He finished creating everything, how striking is it that the next thing God did is He just called time out to just enjoy what He had made. Just to enjoy the pleasure of spending time with the people that He had made. God finds that kind of pleasure in you and in me, and it just tickles Him to death for us to get to a place to realize that it's not the great things that we do for God that He can go, now I can be proud of you because you accomplished something for me, that He has no interest in that. That His great joy is to just have us recognize how much we're loved by Him, and to draw near to Him, and to receive His love, and to reflect His love back, and just to enjoy this relationship. In your outline, I put James 4:8, which says, "Come close to God, and God will come close to you." That this is what He longs for. He was never waiting for me to be good enough. He's never been waiting for you to clean up your act enough so that you could draw near to Him. The only way you can draw near to Him is to just come as you are. We just hung a new sign yesterday outside the entrance to the worship room. I don't know if you saw it when you were walking in, but it just says, "Come as you are." And that's exactly God's invitation to you. When you come into worship, when you come into His presence, don't worry about whether you got it all right and you could check all the boxes. Would you just come? That's God's great invitation. I love you. I made you. I'm crazy about you. Would you just come, draw near? There is nothing that you can do. There is nothing that you will pursue that will do more to bring a sense of settledness and peace and joy in your life than to learn to be a worshiper of God. A worshiper of God when you're with other believers like this, but a worshiper of God when you're just alone with Him. I spent so much of my life making quiet time about checking the box. I got to read my Bible. I got to say my prayers. And over the years, prayer time has changed so much from being a matter of saying my prayers and checking off my prayer list to just being so much more about being a time of just being in the presence of God, inviting Him to draw near to me, drawing close to Him, receiving His love, telling Him how much I love Him, and just honoring Him in that time. And sometimes that's through a lot of words, and sometimes that's through very few words. Of all the things that God is saying and doing in the life of Freedom Church right now, I know this with certainty. for this particular season that we're in, the thing that God has been saying to me again and again and again is call the church to worship, call the church to prayer, call the church to worship and just abide in my presence, to learn to be a worshiping people. And it's interesting that the Lord was really driving this home even before Tony and I had this conversation about the fact that they're about to move and we're going to be without a worship leader and looking for a worship leader, that the Lord was really speaking on this matter. And then, Tony shares that he's departing. And so for just a moment in my mind, I'm like, oh, goodness, that's kind of a crisis for us. And what's that going to mean for our worship time? And it's been so interesting how the Holy Spirit has spoken in my life in relation to that, to say, don't you even fret about the worship leadership thing, because I'm intentionally taking you into a season where the entire church is going to have an opportunity to rediscover the heart of worship. And worship is not preaching, and worship is not music. Those can be tools that are involved in worship, but those are not worship. That this is going to be a season where we together learn to be people of worship. Because here's the thing. There's nobody that we could call to come and be our next worship leader who could ever fill in all the gaps that would be left if we don't just learn to be people of private worship, who spend time just loving God and enjoying His presence. I mean, the wonderful thing about worship is it just explodes on the scene when people who privately worship God get together. It's like you can't even stop that wave. And God is calling us into a season of really making sure that we press into worship. And as a pastor, God is telling me every time you're with the family, it doesn't matter what the setting is. If it's Sunday morning, if it's your small group, if it's your discipleship group, if it's an elder or trustee meeting, if it's a core team meeting, if it's a staff meeting, don't get together with God's people that you don't just spend time in worship. So you want to know what the number one agenda for Freedom Church is? It's not planting a new campus. It's not finding another staff member. It is to make sure that we put the worship of God at the center of everything that we do. That's it. I didn't make up that agenda. Jesus said this is the first and greatest commandment, but then He gave us the second priority, and that is one we'll put generically under the heading of ministry, which we'll define as blessing and meeting the needs of others. Jesus said a second one's equally important, that you love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and prophets are summed up in these two commands. I love how Ephesians 2 sums up what we're supposed to be doing outside of loving God. He says it's God Himself who has made us what we are, and long ages ago He planned that we should spend these lives in helping others. Now again, I'm just trying to be completely candid with you. When I look back over what my life was like, particularly as a teenager and as a young adult, one of the biggest problems, one of the biggest gaps in my life was that I judged almost everyone around me. And I don't mean in a good way, in a really bad way. And what that was driven by was I didn't love myself at all. I saw everything that was wrong with me. And when you don't love yourself, you really stink at loving other people. When you don't accept that you're loved by God, when you think that God just sees everything that's wrong with you and can't think about anything except how He'd like to take you to the woodshed, and you have a terrible self-image, guess what? You don't like much of anybody else either. And so like my spiritual response was to just judge everybody around me. So like two things would come out of that. On the one hand, for me, I had to be a perfect person. So I never drank, I never smoked, I never did drugs, I never cursed. I got to do everything to lead the perfect life. And from this position, even though I feel like, I'm trying to do all the right stuff, and yet I feel so dirty on the inside. And now I'm judging all of you because you don't do it as well as me. What an awful place to live. What a miserable place to be. And you wind up doing the exact opposite of what we've been called to do. Instead of helping people, you know what I tried to do? Is insulate myself from all those filthy sinners. Some of y'all are thinking, we may need a new pastor by the time you get there preaching this message. The truth is ugly. But here's the beautiful other side of that. When you get to the place that you can receive the love of God in your life, and you know that there's nothing that you could do that would cause you to escape from the love of God, suddenly you see people differently. And without even having to try something new, I found this radical change happening in my heart and in my head, that the very people that I used to judge, I suddenly found myself loving deeply, and in their brokenness that I used to want to judge and go, "You're an alcoholic, what kind of sicko are you?" Instead of looking at anything like that, feeling like, how could I help? How could I be a friend? How could I reach out and from here, in a close-up, loving embrace of friendship, help this person to know that they are loved by God and tap into the grace of God that would help them move beyond the pain that they're in, that they're trying to numb through, whatever these things are. Oh, you can't make yourself do that. You can't, I'd heard enough sermons on loving other people to know that doesn't work. Just trying to love other people doesn't work. Anybody else know what I'm talking about? Like the people you can't stand, hearing a sermon about loving other people doesn't make you like them any better, amen? You still don't like them. But I'm telling you, when this starts happening on the inside, people that you didn't like, that you just wanted to judge, suddenly you find yourself loving them and wanting to bless them and wanting to be a friend to them. We talk around here about being a missional people, trying to be intentional about living on mission to serve Jesus at all times. And one of the 5 missional priorities that we set, in fact, is the very first one, is that in line with this, that we make it a missional goal that for every single one of us in living out our faith, that we seek to bless at least 3 people each week with our words or gifts or acts of service. Either saying something that would encourage them, that would build them up, or giving them something that would encourage them and let them know that we value them, or doing something that would ease their load that week. And trying to be mindful about that, not doing it legalistically, but just keeping that at the forefront, that people who care about other people look for ways to encourage them and to show them that they're valued. And so that becomes a second priority, a second of God's great purposes. The third one we would put under the heading of evangelism, which we can define as pursuing friendships designed to introduce people to Jesus. Jesus, when he gave the Great Commission, started with, "Go and make disciples of all nations." Now, I used to hear that, and I grew up in the Baptist church, so one of the things that we always got right in the Baptist church was an emphasis on the scriptures and the gospel, and that everybody is called to share the good news of Jesus with everyone, to lead other people to faith in Jesus, which is really important. Unfortunately, a lot of how that got packaged wasn't in the healthiest way, because at the risk of oversimplifying, a lot of what I carried away from that was, you got to perfect your Jesus speech. And you got to look for every opportunity you possibly can to corner somebody, to give them your Jesus speech, and if it goes really well, to lead them in the sinner's prayer so you can get that lost person saved. Now, some of you from outside the Baptist church are going, "Really? Okay, they didn't say it that way, but that was pretty much what I did with it." So, anytime you flew on an airplane, feel sorry for the sucker sitting next to me, because this is like, got you locked in for 2 hours. I'm going to give you my Jesus talk and see if I can't get you to pray the prayer, because it's, all of this about the gospel. Just, we were just putting, me personally, we're putting just enough of a wrong spin on that it made it really ineffective. What I've learned over time, that many of you already live out so beautifully, is that the call of Jesus to go and make disciples, to make followers of Jesus out of any and everybody, first of all, it's helpful to read it in the Greek, where the construction is a little different than what we get in the NIV. That it actually, instead of it being so much a command to go, as in pack your bags and go to some other place and do this, that the instruction is, as you go, make disciples. Now that may sound real subtle, but it's actually a really significant difference, because the idea that implies is not so much you got to go somewhere far away to do this thing. No, just as you go. As you go to work, as you just go through life, as you go through this week, help other people to become friends with your best friend, Jesus. Be intentional, just as Jesus was, to pick out people that you're going to pursue relationships with, and along the way, help them to get to know the person that you are most in love with, your best friend, Jesus. And that is very different from trying to corner somebody long enough that they have to listen to your Jesus speech and then get them to pray a prayer. I know a lot of people who do this well. I don't know anybody who I enjoy to watch doing the last two things that I've shared more than my own wife, and she won't like the fact that I'm talking about her, and I'm going to do it anyway. But I love watching her live out these two realities so faithfully because they go hand in hand. Blessing other people and being intentional to build relationships with other people with the goal that along the way, this is going to be a redemptive relationship and it's going to be an opportunity to introduce that person at some point to Jesus. Jackie has this ability to focus like a laser beam on the things that I miss, but that she notices with other people and finds them as opportunities to let them know that they matter to her. I mean, I think of like this week, that she took notice of a coworker who one day this week, was the anniversary of the date that this coworker's mother died. And she was struggling because of that. And so Jackie makes a mental note, and she remembers to go get a card and go buy flowers and to write a real personal note to encourage this person on that day and to make sure that she gets flowers on that day and knows that I am praying for you today because I know how hard today is, because I still remember every anniversary how hard it is remembering losing my dad. And that kind of stuff matters. We're in so many relationships that I would not have imagined being in now, where we spend quite a bit of time with people that years ago I wouldn't have ever thought of trying to spend time with them. And Jackie becomes the conduit for so much of that. I mean, one of the relationships that we're in right now with another couple that we weren't looking for or pursuing, and felt prompted by God to invite them to dinner one night, which we didn't know if they would even go because, like, they didn't know us. We didn't really know them. We just had sort of bumped into them at sometimes out in public, and they met us for dinner and suddenly started getting together a lot. They started instigating a lot, and the lady in this couple owns a restaurant that we go to at times, and it's always really busy, and they're always overwhelmed. And it's Jackie's nature to just do this. The first time she did it, I'm like, what are you doing? But like, we go in, and they're always just going 100 miles an hour and never can have enough staff for all that's going on there. And so the next thing I know, unasked, uninvited, Jackie just steps up and is welcoming people to the restaurant and checking them in and handing out buzzers and writing stuff down. And I'm like, what are you doing? And then I look up, and she's bussing tables and doing setups for tables. And I'm like, did anybody ask you to do this? No, I'm just helping out. And literally, as all these servers are going 100 miles an hour, different ones start going by and say, thanks so much for helping, and who are you? And she's just like, I'm just a friend. Kid you not. So like that lasted for about an hour that day, because it lasted through our meal. She keeps hopping up and bussing tables and all. And I'm like, you don't work here. We came here to eat. And so for the better part of a year now, every time we go to that restaurant, I mean, it's just become a known thing. When the staff see her come in, they're, great, we're glad you're here. And she just jumps up, and she's just the hostess, and she busses tables, for the first 20 or 30 minutes we're there. Sometimes during the meal, she'll just, without a word, I look up and she's gone because she's over bussing a table or she's checking people in. And this friend has come to appreciate it to the point that when Jackie walks in, half the time she's like, all right, get busy right here. And it's like, and it's never been for compensation or, comped a meal or anything. She just does those things to lighten somebody else's load. But guess what's happening along the way? A bond of friendship has been created that stirs all kinds of questions, all kinds of really healthy questions. What's up with you? What is it that's different about you? And it's not just the owner, it's the people who work there who are like, why do you always want to help? When Christians begin to behave like that, lots of people who don't know Jesus, we're not going to have to corner them to get to give them our Jesus speech. They're going to be asking the question at some level, what is it about you? Our second missional goal that we're real intentional about in line with this is, as you see in your outline, is to share a meal or coffee with at least 3 people each week from outside of your household for the goal of building relationships with redemptive purposes. I remember some years ago thinking about embracing this kind of missional approach to life and being scared to death of this kind of thought. Like, do I really want to spend that much time And I have discovered it's not work. It's actually a joy. I was just, this weekend, I was reflecting, because I try and every week say, have we been faithful to this? I started counting up this week, and it's like, there were 8 or 9 people that between the two of us, we were either able to share a meal or coffee with, either one-on-one or as a couple with another couple, without even really trying. It becomes a lifestyle thing, and it's not a burden, it's a joy. A fourth reality could be summed up by the word fellowship, sharing regularly in Christian community with a circle of friends. And you may say, where is that in the scripture and what you just read today? When Jesus gave as the second part of the Great Commission, baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the thing that's easy to miss in that is, I think a lot of times we imagine that baptism is something that's about me and God. That I just get baptized into being a child of God. And let's be real clear about this. Faith is what brings you into a relationship with God. Baptism becomes the defined way that we identify with the family of God. Jesus got baptized, and he did not get baptized to get right with the Father. Jesus got baptized because he was reaching out to make a connection with the people of God who were being baptized as a community of faith, and that's still what happens. Baptism is the rite of passage into the family of God. It's how we formally say, I want to belong. And it's why we don't ever privately baptize. We gather the church to celebrate baptism together, living as a Christian community. Ephesians 2:19 says this, you belong in God's household with every other Christian. And of course, we all know what the trend of the day is. It's to be very spiritual. It's to be a Christian, but to not be so high on the church. I want to tell you that's a horrible mistake, and it's very unbiblical, and it's very unhealthy. Let's be very clear on this. The church is the hope of the world. It is. And I know some people are like, whoa, no. Jesus is the hope of the world. Well, I'm here to tell you, the church is the body of Christ. If you want the world to see Jesus, it's the church that shows it to him. The church, according to the scriptures, is literally the physical presence of Christ on earth. We together are the body of Christ. The church is the hope of the world. And we better work together as a community of faith and belong to the community of faith. I love how James 3 puts it when it says, you can develop a healthy, robust community that lives right with God and enjoys its results only if you do the hard work. Everybody say the hard work. Only if you do the hard work of getting along with each other and treating each other with dignity and honor. Isn't that a real winsome thought? That you can live in this community that's so rich and so meaningful, but it will not happen organically just by itself. You're going to have to do work. You know what that work looks like? I'll tell you 2 things it looks like. It looks like you blocking off time in your schedule every week to be with a particular community. And here's the other half of what that looks like. When the people who are in your community that drive you crazy show up, you love them anyway. Come on. If you're looking for a reason to not go, he's going to be there. She's going to be there. There's going to be sand in your shoe in that group, right? There's going to be somebody that rubs you the wrong way, and it's worth it. If you're waiting for the perfect community of faith to come along, the moment you show up, it's going to be broken, right? Because it's not perfect anymore after I get there. You got to do hard work to live in community with other people, but the fruit of it is so sweet, and there's no place I experience this more in my own small group than in my small group. I love my small group. I love Monday evenings, but you know what? As much as I love them, there are weeks that are just so busy where there's a part of me for a moment that goes, oh, it's small group night. It's another thing to have to do. And for just a moment, I'm like, oh, I wish I had the night free. But then I remind myself, it's so worth it. It's worth the work. And sometimes the work is just blocking off the time and going when you didn't feel like going. And invariably, I come away going, I love those people. I love being with those people. And my small group, some of us have been together for 8 or 10 years. I know them. I mean, they are family. And a bunch of them haven't been in the group even a year, and I just love them all to death. And you know what one of the healthiest expressions of love in our small group that I've discovered is? I was reminding our leadership team as we were praying this morning of this. One of the things that we'll say is, when we're going to pray together, You know what the normal deal in a group is when you're going to pray together is we're going to do prayer requests now, and then we spend 20 minutes doing prayer requests, and then God bless the poor sucker that gets called on to lead us in prayer that's supposed to remember all those prayer requests. You're like, oh, why didn't I write them down? They called on me. You know what I'm talking about. It's that awkward moment. So we just say, if you can say it, you can pray it. So instead of spending 20 minutes just talking about it, we're going to pray, and we're going to honor the Lord, and along the way, we're going to mention requests. And when you tell it to us, you're going to be telling it to God, and we're just all going to agree with you in that. So that's the pattern for us. But you know what I've discovered in our group? I was just noticing this again this past Monday night when we were praying, and we got to the point where we're praying for one another. Instead of it looking like what I just described, it went one level beyond that. And I've seen this multiple times. Instead of me having to say whatever Jackie or I might share as our concern before we can say it, people are praying for each other's needs before they can voice them because we're so involved in each other's lives. We know how to pray for each other's kids. We know how to pray for what's on one another's hearts before you can even say it. That is fantastic. It is beautiful to be in a group where people really love each other and are praying for each other and checking on each other and encouraging each other. You've got to be intentional. And hey, if you want to find a place, all you got to do is say so. We will plug you in. We desperately need to live in circular community. There's almost no other place in the world in our culture today that invites circular community except for a small group. It's not a classroom. We are built around knowing and loving and supporting each other. The fifth and final purpose is one we would sum up as discipleship. Intentionally teaching others what we've learned about following Jesus. He finished the Great Commission by saying, teach them to obey everything that I've told you to do. You get that? Jesus is saying, all right, I've conveyed these things to you. Now you convey them to others just as I have to you. Paul said this to Timothy, his understudy. You should teach people whom you can trust the things that you and many others have heard me say, and then they will be able to teach others. You get what he's saying? Hey, Timothy, you remember all the stuff that you've heard me teach and pass on to you? You find people that you can do the same thing for them, and then guess what you're going to teach them to do? To pass that on to the next generation beyond them. Now, I've understood that this was like the priority in calling of believers, but what I spent most of my life not knowing how to do is finding an avenue for doing that in a really effective way. And like many, many years ago, I discovered the impact of being in a one-on-one accountable relationship. But the problem with the way we were doing that was it just kind of went on for eternity until like somebody died or moved away, and it was nice, but it didn't seem to go anywhere beyond just like, well, we love each other and encourage each other and build each other up and help each other learn and grow. But that's sort of the end of the deal. What the Lord has led us into over the last several years is an approach that's been very effective, and that is to be intentional. We call it 1 to 3 discipleship groups, just like Jesus had 3 men that he really invested in, that for about 9 months to a year at a time, we help one lady invest in 3 ladies, one man invest in 3 men, working through a set body of material that's not just about learning doctrine, but it's about really conveying one person to another what we've learned about fundamental things like how to study the Bible and how to pray and how to share Christ relationally and how to engage in spiritual warfare and how to handle your finances in a way that honors God and how to discover your spiritual gifts and using those, and just on and on and on, in an environment where we're going to systematically work through these things, convey what we've learned to others in an environment where they're learning to lead as well as just learning, and where that's going to flip at the end of 9 months or at the end of a year, and they're going to do the same thing with the next group. It's bearing wonderful fruit, not because we dreamed up something great, but guess what we did? We oriented what we were doing around another of the great purposes of God. So let me just spell those out for you again. If you had to look at all of the New Testament, what is it that God is doing that he's inviting us to take part in? Worship, ministry, evangelism, building relationships, reaching people, doing intentional community together with other believers, and discipling others, passing on what we've learned to others. Now, you might hear all of that and go, good grief, that's a whole long list of things, preacher, that now I feel like I'm just burdened with 5 more things I need to go do. Don't look at it that way. The Lord is so faithful and so patient. Here's what he does in moments like this. If you're looking at that going, I've got deficits in 4 of those 5 areas. I got 4 more things I need to start doing this week or this month. No. God's so faithful. He normally focuses on one thing at a time. And so here's what I would encourage you to do is just say, Lord, where do I start? What's the beginning point for me? He may say something really specific, maybe surprising. Say, you need to get baptized. Or you need to get in a small group. You need to pursue a relationship with this person outside the church. Or maybe he's just going to call you to something as basic as just learning to be a person of worship and taking a little window of time each day just to be with him and to worship him. Why don't you ask him what the next step is for you as we turn to him together in prayer right now? God, we celebrate your love and your goodness in our lives and in this fellowship. And we do want to just wrap our lives around you and what you're about and what you're doing. And we admit, at so many points in our lives, we've tried to set the agenda. We've tried to decide what we're going to live for and then ask you to bless that. And we just repent of that. We turn away from that, we let it go, and we ask for grace to just let it go. Hey, if that's where you are right now, maybe you're where I was in the spring of '94, that the first grace that I needed from God was to let go of some ways of thinking and living that had poisoned my life. Hey, if that's where you are, would you just say, oh God, I need your grace today. I know I've got to change how I think. There's some things that I've got to change about how I'm living, and I don't think I've got the power to do it, so I'm asking you for help to let go of some things. And now, God, we ask you for fresh direction. We want to begin to wrap our lives around your purposes. I pray, God, that in this moment you'd be very specific. Why don't you ask God to show you, Lord, of the things that you're calling us to, what's the one right now that you would have me press into? Why don't you ask him that and just be still for a moment and listen? Oh God, help us to respond to your voice. Help us to learn to love you and receive your love and share your love in tangible ways with the people around us. Help us to really live in line with what you're doing. We welcome your work among us as we celebrate your greatness in this place. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I surely hope that what you heard was relevant and helpful, and above everything, I hope that what you experienced today really helped your heart to connect with the heart of God. Now, if what you heard for you stirred up any questions or maybe led you toward some type of spiritual decision, maybe you want to talk with someone about something that's on your mind, I would love to hear from you. And so I would encourage you, reach out by email. At the bottom of the screen, you see my email address. It's mark@myfreedomchurch.net. That's not going to go to a secretary or an assistant. That'll come directly to me. I'd love to hear from you and talk with you about anything that's on your mind. And if in the future you're in our area, we would love for you to come and worship with us at Freedom Church. But until then, we invite you to access all of the sermon material that you find online. Again, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. Hope that you have a great day.